Alright, after solidifying the roster on cutdown day, Howie Roseman added several guys to the practice squad, as the Eagles definitely made a shift to get younger, featuring one of the youngest rosters in the league. However, while that may be an uncertainty on if it'll pay off, one gamble appears to have worked. Plus, more reasons Jahan Dotson elevates the offense, and another intriguing wide receiver signing with potential. Also, the Eagles may be doing something strange with Ben VanSumeren, so let's talk about it. But first, let's run it. What's up, guys? I'm just going to apologize because I'm a little bit under the weather, but, we push on. Just like all the dudes who made the 53-man roster, where the Eagles will now have one of the youngest squads in the league. In fact, they actually rank right around the 6th youngest in the NFL after being the 21st youngest last year. Now, obviously, the departures of guys like Jason Kelce and Fletcher Cox adjust that number and play a big factor. By the way, Kelce did say in a recent interview that he plans to be in the building all season and plans to offer his expertise as well as frame of reference for guys that want help, which is great, especially because this is the greenest group Philly's had since 2012. Okay, I'm with you if you hear that number and go, wait, wasn't that Andy Reid's last year? And yes, it was, when the Eagles suffered several injuries on the O-line and ultimately just lacked depth up front, leading to a 4-12 season that wound up sending Big Red off to Kansas City. Of course, let's be real, there were also other significant flaws on that roster. And while sure, there's a couple spots of uncertainty, I wouldn't say it's near as dire of a situation as 2012. It's just, there's a lot more well-established guys making bank.
We have a lot of good players making well-deserved money that we have to have the bottom of our roster as much on rookie deals as possible. And we've been fortunate that even though that we've paid these guys, that we have had some picks. And at the same time, they got to prove it. Nobody's on scholarship here. So it's well-deserved that those guys have had the opportunity to make this team. And I think it is important as you build your roster to compete for championships that you have a growing young core that you can build with along with the guys that you're paying.
Sure, I think we'd all agree. You have to have guys ready to pick up and carry the torch. However, even with the roster getting younger, the one biggest surprise from cuts was to see rookie Dylan McMahon not make it onto the 53-man squad. After all, the Birds typically invest in O-line depth, and especially a rookie at that. Heck, I don't think anyone predicted the McMahon move because it didn't sound like he had that bad of a camp. Plus, the other follow-up question to that was, who's the backup center going to be? Now, it's worth mentioning that Howie did say they have guys who've played center and are capable, yet looking into it further, Landon Dickerson is the only guy outside of Cam Jurgens who's gotten meaningful snaps at center. But I find it hard to believe that Jeff Stoutland would want to ask Dickerson to move inside if Jurgens were to get injured. By the way, I'm not saying that Dickerson couldn't make that move. I mean, he'd probably be successful if you asked him to do it, but it still seems like, okay, you've got your left guard, you paid him for that position, maybe go get a solidified or at least have a solidified backup center. Yeah, that's maybe why Howie's so good at what he does. Since amazingly, Dylan McMahon did make it through waivers and now the Eagles have signed him to the practice squad. And the same thing for tight end EJ Jenkins, who was my other disappointment to see not make the 53, since it seemed like the former wideout might have done enough to earn a spot. Although, looking around the league at other options being released may have helped Howie ultimately decide to chance it. Having said that, there is one guy the Birds can't quit in Albert O, with a former 4th-round pick taking an IR spot after having surgery to repair a core muscle. Again, this is a dude who's shown the ability in the passing game, or at least has tape out there to impress. However, we haven't really gotten to see much of it at all in Philly, with Albert only playing in 4 games last season and registering 1 target. So I don't know, maybe he's the ultimate tight end 3 option, or perhaps there's a completely off-the-wall scenario, which I'll get to more of that in a sec. Anyway, another guy who made the roster is my birthday bro Eli Mr. Pick 6 Ricks, despite not having the best training camp. And even though that may be the case, Howie said the reason they kept 11 defensive backs on the roster is due to last season's depth issues, with the Birds GM taking the blame and admitting he didn't put the coaches in the best position with the roster, so wanted to make sure and correct that this year. Of course, like we've said, the hope is that you don't have to go deep into the roster, but again, this is the NFL, and having seen recent instances, you're going to need the guys for the depth. So personally, I like the move, and then, keeping with the secondary, James Bradberry officially beat the odds and made the roster.
Hey, I can't imagine this place without you. Can't you? That's so nice.
I've talked a lot about JB recently, so I won't keep harping on it, but maybe he ends up being relatively effective as a backup. However, the Eagles definitely went heavy at safety, as Tristin McCollum made the roster, and that was a for sure in most people's minds. Well, at least because the dude had been flying around all preseason making plays. Like he just made it too difficult to cut him with the kind of tape he put out there. Also, talking about the safety spot and another guy who's also a twin, Sidney Brown will remain on the PUP list, meaning the first action he'd get is not likely until week 6, since the bye week is in week 5. And hopefully him returning will be the type of reinforcement the safety position needs to bolster the depth and physicality. But speaking of depth, Ainias Smith did officially go onto the IR, after reporting discomfort in his ankle and hamstring following Saturday's final preseason game, and then getting an MRI to confirm he needed to start out on the IR with the potential to return in week 6.
It's all in your head. You sick Sons of bitches. I mean, you walk in that door on your two legs all fat and cocky and looking at me in my chair, and you tell me it's all in my head?
Look, I hope that he's all right and makes a speedy recovery, but you can't deny the fact that the timing of this is really perfect to sneak a guy onto the roster. Granted, I personally thought Sub-Zero did enough to make it anyway, yet the ability to create some extra room just works out perfectly.
Two guys that, if they came back healthy at some point during the season, we think they can help us, but we got to get them right. You know, they're hurt, and so those were two guys that we would have had to put on the 53 in other years and then put them on IR tomorrow. So certainly felt like the rule in this situation helped us keep two other players that we may not have been able to keep.
True, and it also maybe left a spot for a guy who definitely deserved a roster spot in defensive tackle Thomas Booker, because he continued to flash in both games and practice by making plays and showing an ability to create pressure while also holding up against the run, and very clearly impressing the front office.
This is a guy that if you were here in the offseason, he lived in the facility. Tremendous work ethic, obviously incredibly smart guy, a Stanford guy. He's got all the tools in his body. And just an incredible tribute to him and how hard he worked. And when you watch the tape and you see his get off and his ability to play with leverage, to play with power, to affect the quarterback, to be disruptive around the quarterback in the backfield, to us it was clear the guy deserved to be on the team. Probably should have said this to him before I said it to you guys, but just really proud of him.
By the way, this is kind of obvious, but another guy who impressed Howie Roseman is Jahan Dotson, with the GM raving about Dotson's ability and sharing that the wideout is a guy they like dating all the way back to his draft. And he was also a favorite of Johnny Page's, who argues that Dotson is the most talented wide receiver 3 that Philly's had in quite some time. Granted, not much to write home about, but still citing his excellent route running ability, especially on comebacks and outs, which are definitely staples in a Kellen Moore offense. Now, on the flip side, Johnny did bring up some questionable drops as being an issue, so yeah, you never like to see that. But again, just look at the route running from this dude and you can see he makes life easier for Jalen Hurts. Plus, he's shown the constant ability and quickness to get open and make plays, while having a definite understanding of how to beat the zone and run into the open area for the QB. Of course, like Johnny points out, there's a reason Washington was willing to trade him, as aside from the occasional drops, Dotson can struggle against physical corners. And even though he has noteworthy quickness, his top-end speed isn't going to allow him to just consistently run by people. Still, I'm hyped for the move, and I know a lot of people are, but this is the best receiving core, heck, really the best offense the Eagles have had in a really, really long time. At the same time, the 53 only has 5 receivers and 2 tight ends, so it's worth seeing who Philly might add to the roster in terms of pass catchers. Of course, they did make several additions to the roster via the practice squad, in addition to Dylan McMahon and EJ Jenkins, with the Birds signing back linebacker Oren Burks, which in my mind is a big win considering the fact that he played well in the final preseason game and was targeted when Philly first signed him. There's also Paris Campbell who returned, Ty Davis-Price at running back, Nick Gates to add depth to the interior line, Will Greer, of course my guy Gabe Hall is back at the defensive tackle spot, and then Andre Sam at safety, as well as Caden Stearns, who cleared via the non-football related injury waiver, plus Brandon Smith at linebacker, Laken Vakalai at tackle, which for the record he actually doesn't count since he's the international exemption, and then Jack Stoll even made a return to the roster after getting cut by the Giants. Oh yeah, Marcus Rosemy-Jack Saint also signed after the Commanders released him, allowing the Birds to claim another Philly Dawg. And I don't know if he ends up making any significant contributions, but he did lead Washington in catches this preseason, with the UDFA showing a knack for jump balls and making big plays. Anyway, having said that, I like all the practice squad additions, but there's still 3 more spots for those that are wondering how many positions left, so who would you expect them to sign, or who do you want them to sign? Personally, I'm thinking it's at least 1 corner, considering the fact that you do have 6 corners on the roster for 53, but you don't have any of them on the practice squad yet. Maybe a guy like Josh Jobe, since he's a playmaker on special teams, but yes, we have heard Vic Fangio talk about him being too grabby. Also, I do need to mention that Q officially changed his number to 27, going back to his college number. So, apologies to all of us who have purchased the number 30, but at least you can say you were one of the OGs with the original number. But as for the pass catcher spots, the Eagles might be doing something strange. A shout out to Jimmy Kempski for pointing this out, but they actually had linebacker Ben VanSumeren lined up at both receiver and tight end, where last week during a one-on-one rep, BVS ran an absolutely filthy corner route to dust Andre Sam and get wide open. But Kenny Pickett ended up overthrowing him, leading to VanSumeren admitting later that he went out to eat with Kenny and some of the other guys, but couldn't even look at Kenny.
I have cause. It is because I hate him.
Obviously, there's some sarcasm in BVS's comment. However, it appears there's some more seriousness when it comes to the former UDFA getting more chances to catch passes, with BVS playing it coy and saying, "We're going to see real soon, that's all I can really say on that." So I don't know, could be something there. I mean, remember, this dude played wide receiver in high school while setting the Michigan state record for receiving yards, and is a crazy athlete. Heck, he ranked as the 93rd most athletic linebacker to enter the draft since 1987. However, if you were to move into receiver, his athletic score actually improves. Like, yeah, this dude ran a 4.4 at 6'2", 231 pounds while posting a 42.5-inch vertical. And most everyone realizes he's for sure your best special teams player. Dude who played fullback in college as well before transitioning to linebacker. So again, the Swiss Army knife ability of BVS is evident. Granted, yes, long-term as a linebacker, but who knows? Maybe the Eagles are dialing up packages to have him there at tight end, maybe even a little bit of receiver, possibly fullback, blocking for Saquon Barkley. It wouldn't be that bad. Like, I don't have any problem with that, especially with the intensity this dude plays with. Anyway, just something I thought was unusual and wanted to point out, but I'm curious to get y'all's thoughts, so let me know in the comments. Also, seeing that we had so many storylines and takeaways from around the birds, I figured why not get Pro Football Network NFL analyst Anthony DiBona's thoughts and hop on to catch up on all the latest happenings. If you can, to put you on the spot, but the biggest one surprise from the 53-man roster.
This might be kind of underwhelming, but the biggest surprise might have been Albert O being placed on IR, because I felt like it seemed like a consensus that he was just kind of going to be released or waived or whatever, but I guess for some reason Howie Roseman does not want to admit that that trade might have been wrong and like that was the wrong move, but it's for some reason he's sticking around in Philadelphia, so he's still there. I think the Ainias Smith was kind of one of the bigger moves also, but that was kind of announced basically 2 days before because of the report came out about his injury. So once that came out, everybody kind of safely assumed that he was going to go on IR. So those two spots kind of went out of the way. And then just looking towards who they kept, I think maybe guys like Eli Ricks, who I thought may not have made the cut because of their depth at corner and how they revamped the secondary this offseason. Thomas Booker IV was a guy that received a lot of hype from reporters during training camp and the way he played during the preseason, and he kind of stuck around. And then Darian Kennard was a guy that a lot of people didn't think was going to make the cut because he's, I guess, so young and not really proven, but I wrote about for PFN. It's going to be coming out soon, but basically the Eagles are kind of willing to embrace the youth movement right now, whereas before they kind of preferred more older, proven veteran guys at depth spots, but it seems like this time around they're kind of going younger at the position, so that's kind of interesting to watch.
It really is. I'm glad you brought that up because I was going to mention Jimmy Kimsky, I think, was the first tweet that I saw, and some others taking that as well. But the average age for the Eagles based on the roster here, and granted, we're talking about, a couple tenths here and there, but still the average age is the youngest for Philly since 2012. I mean, it's a long time when we consider the fact that where the roster has been, especially last year. And, you looked at it and you're like, okay, there's certainly some age, but also maybe some speed and some athleticism. You're lacking in some certain areas, so you go younger. And how he talked about it, since, I guess as soon as the season ended pretty much, but certainly at the combine and even going into the draft. And so you put your money where your mouth is. Like, this is the roster. This is the one they're moving forward with. But I'm still curious because you bring up Albert O, and to start there, I guess, it is one of those that's like, we've seen it for so long of, okay, yes, there's some potential that he might have in terms of the passing game, but there's question marks and concerns for blocking. Yet even when he's been out there, like the sample size is so terribly small. It's I don't know. I'm kind of just shocked or surprised that, like, is Howie really still going to be gambling or doubling down or tripling down or whatever we are at this point for Albert O and what he can do with his offense, because we haven't seen too much, but yet, like you mentioned there, he's taking up an IR spot, and it's with the intention, obviously, of returning. So he should be able to, assuming the abdomen surgery that he had I think it was an oblique or some sort of abdomen surgery, but to repair that and hopefully get back after, I guess, the bye week, which would be like week 6. So I don't know. It's just it's a crazy, strange situation, especially when you look at EJ Jenkins, who, quite honestly, like, I had EJ Jenkins in my 53-man roster prediction. Of course, he did not make it there. But I'm assuming, would you agree with the fact that because of this Albert O move, that's what ultimately led to an EJ Jenkins not making the roster? Or, I guess, would it not have mattered for EJ Jenkins as well?
Well, I guess, I don't know. It seems like a lot of people think that EJ Jenkins looked good for the most part, but then that final preseason game, he kind of missed on a couple opportunities that he had, whereas people thought if he kind of hauled in a pass here or there, that might have put him over the top and kind of cemented his spot on the final roster. But I think I'm just not sure he's really ready to contribute right away either. I know he's a younger player with a lot of upside, and he's shown flashes in training camp and preseason, but they might want to go with a more proven player. And we've seen names that have been released earlier today, and like a Donald Parham or good old friend Jack Stoll, who was released by the Giants. So people are already kind of speculating that they might add one of them maybe tomorrow or in the coming days. But it just seems like the Eagles are going to roll with Dallas Goedert and Grant Calcaterra for now at tight end. But given their injury history, it's definitely concerning that they don't really have a proven player behind those two. But then again, Now you can have veterans on the practice squad, or they can always make another move to the active roster later. So I think they'll add someone here shortly, but it was just kind of interesting to see them just go with those two and kind of expose Jenkins to waivers. Even though that's what I predicted for my final roster projection, it's still kind of weird to see them only have 2 players at tight end, because in recent years they've kept as many as 4 tight ends at a time. So it's just kind of a switch in philosophy. I guess maybe this is Kellen Moore's kind of system and what he's going to roll with, but it's still interesting to watch moving forward.
That's true. It is Kellen Moore's system, so maybe a little differences there. By the way, how did your official 53-man roster prediction shake out? I missed that. It's been kind of busy, crazy day. But where were we at percentages wise? How many off of 100% were we?
I had 50 of 53 players correct. So
okay.
I missed on, and it was actually the same exact players wrong as Brandon Lee Gowan of Bleeding Green Nation. So that kind of made me feel a little bit better. So I was off on Dylan McMahon, who we didn't really talk about. Brett Toth, I had making the final roster as well, and Ainias Smith, because I had released my projection before the report came out about his injury. So if I could redo it, if I would have known about that, I probably would have had Ricks making the roster, because he was kind of like my 54th guy in my initial projections. So in that case, I probably would have had 51 of 53, but I mean, it's still a pretty high percentage. I'll take it. I'm not going to complain, but I think I've tweeted out kind of ranking all of the beat writers next to each other, and EJ Smith actually took the crown. He had 52 of 53 players. So
ooh, okay.
that was pretty impressive. Dylan McMahon was the only player he missed on. So just to kind of jump back to the biggest surprise cuts, I think he kind of takes the cake, because it seemed like he was the top option at backup center behind Cam Jurgens, and they did draft him. And I think the last time the Eagles cut a rookie that they drafted was 2020. So it's been quite a few years. So that was an interesting move to see. And I wonder if he'll even make it back to them on the practice squad, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's a very... It's definitely, to me, the biggest shock, because I did a live stream on it, talked about it previously, had several comments as well, and it's like, oh, hey, what was the biggest surprise, the thing that you didn't foresee? I was late, I'll be honest. I was late getting out my prediction because of the weekend and all that, so it's a little bit of a cheating aspect for mine. I did get Eli Ricks correct, but it was because of the illusion of, or I guess the alluding to the tweet of Ainias Smith, and I won't necessarily say, is he legit injured? Is it a scheme of Howie Roseman? I don't know.
Awfully convenient.
We wish him well. We do hope that he's 100% returning after the bye week. Ainias Smith, Sub-Zero, you're all good. But you're right. It was very, very good timing for that to work out, to keep the rookie. Because we had said it before, Ainias Smith, there's no way he would have made the roster. If you let him go, he's not clearing waivers. Another team's going to pick him up because of the rookie, because of the potential aspect. You have no clue. You haven't seen enough tape on him to say, oh, yeah, that dude's a bust and he's not going to get claimed. So I think some team out there would have done that and you would have lost him. So, again, works out for Howie there. But keeping of that same tone, Dylan McMahon is another rookie that I was shocked. Like, it's one of those where I'm saying kind of the similar argument to it. He's a rookie, and I don't recall seeing hardly anything, or certainly reading many reports to go, oh, wow, Dylan McMahon is really struggling. Now, I don't remember also seeing, oh, he's shining and he's just dominating. But at the same time, it's like, okay, well, not being noticed is not the worst thing, because at least he's not just getting, obliterated by the D-line. And so you say, well, there's absolutely no way he could be a backup option. But here we are. And by the way, I've got a link in the description for Anthony's article as far as potential backup options at center and what they should do. But I don't really know that Dylan McMahon makes it back to you again as of the time of this recording. So we'll see, what transpires. But it is one of those where, out of all the O-line spots, I was like, okay, Brett Toth, maybe not. But Dylan McMahon was just an automatic shoe-in to me, because I'm like, okay, well, who else are you going to go with as far as your backup option at center? And yet they don't have Toth, they don't have Dylan McMahon. It's literally just Cam Jurgens. Is there I don't want to get overblown or out of the ordinary here as far as like major concerns, but is there somewhat of a concern as far as like where that plan should be with center, or at least a surprise there?
Well, I think it's interesting because Howie Roseman in his press conference following the final cuts, he talked about how they have players, and he used players, plural, that have experience playing center. But if you look at their roster, they literally have Cam Jurgens and then Landon Dickerson. So, I mean, if something happens to Cam Jurgens, and he was already injured last season, so I'm sure he might be banged up again. He's certainly not the Iron Man that Jason Kelce was. But if something happens to him there, you're kind of interrupting two spots instead of just having a backup at center. So now you'd have to move Landon Dickerson over from left guard to center, and then maybe you're putting like Trevor Keegan in at left guard. So now you're filling 2 spots because of one injury. I don't think that's ideal. So I think the most obvious option is probably signing Nick Gates or Brett Toth, possibly both, to the practice squad, and then you can elevate maybe Toth for 3 games and then Gates for 3 games. But then after that, there's 17 games in the season. So you need to have some type of long-term plan, somebody on the active roster that you can rely on at center. And I don't think relying on Landon Dickerson is the right move to make because, like I said, that would just cause too much of a shuffle along the interior of the offensive line to kind of make things work.
I'm totally with you, yes. Because, again, it's like, okay, sure, if you had to, worst case scenario, that's fine. But Landon Dickerson is a left guard for a reason. You want him there ideally. If you have someone that has to come in and play center, great, yes, solidify that. But it's one of those that I can't really fathom, and it does seem like there's unlikely that a Dylan McMahon stays there. So even though we didn't get those reports, I've got to believe that he struggled enough, or Jeff Stoutland didn't see much from him to go, yeah, it's worth keeping a spot. Because again, this is more so speculation, not any sort of reports that I've heard. But I mean, you can infer this based on what we know about Jeff Stoutland and the clout that he has in the room. If he wanted Dylan McMahon to be on the roster, he probably would have gotten that extra spot. And whether that would have meant Eli Ricks or some other individual, you could have fought it out. But it feels like if you said, hey, Stout, do you need a backup center, that he's probably going to get his guy based on the job tenure and just what he's done with his squad. And yet he hasn't, or he didn't have Dylan McMahon there. So I don't know. It is definitely, to me, one of the most surprising as far as cuts go and individuals on that side. So I guess we'll see. Certainly, keeping in that same tone, though, we talk about the wide receiver spot, and the Eagles currently only sticking with 5, at least the initial 53-man roster of 5 wide receivers, kind of slipping Ainias Smith in there, like we mentioned. But John Ross, him one of those casualties as far as the cuts go, and also Paris Campbell. So it would have been interesting, I guess, before the Jahan Dotson trade, but that not as much of a, I guess a surprise with that having taken place. But still, you only have 5 receivers, and you already mentioned it, you only have 2 tight ends. Does it feel like you might get something else out there, especially in terms of, I guess, pass catchers? We've already talked about tight ends, but wide receiver group or anything on that side? Because there's lots of names out there. We could throw several, and we've been keeping an eye. But does it feel like that move may be in play?
I feel like the obvious choice is just trying to bring back Campbell or Ross on the practice squad, or maybe even both, just because you kind of have that continuity and you don't really want to shuffle up too much in case you are elevating one of these guys as early as week 1. You kind of want to have somebody that's been there throughout. But then again, Noah Brown is out there, and I feel like he's kind of been
talked about him a lot.
Been linked to Kellen Moore when he was a free agent earlier this offseason, and he opted to go back to Houston, and a lot of people thought it was questionable because of their depth at receiver. And sure enough, fast forward to now, and he was cut. So now he'll be out there again. It feels like a lot of other teams can probably present him with a bigger opportunity and more snaps than he'll get in Philadelphia. But maybe he really likes the idea of being that kind of top backup behind the Eagles' top 3 with EJ Brown, Devontae Smith, and now Jahan Dotson. So it just seems like it could be a good fit if he's willing to kind of take a back seat and play that 4th role at wide receiver, because he would easily leap over Johnny Wilson or Brent Covey for that 4th spot. But it just depends on how much he valued that relationship with Kellen Moore. But it would certainly put the Eagles' wide receiver room, I think it would clearly be the best room in the NFL overall if he lands in Philadelphia.
Let's talk about that too, because we haven't been able to, I guess, record. We've had conversations outside of that, but having talked about Jahan Dotson and the big news there, the trade that Howie Roseman makes within the division, which is definitely one of those that I don't think a lot of people saw coming. A few did. I will give credit because I saw some comments. Did not say it's impossible, but at this point, I think we've all learned that, when it's like, it's very unlikely, the 0.0% for the Saquon, maybe not the exact same for Jahan Dotson, but it did feel like, okay, you have a bunch of other receivers that might be those types of trades, but not within the division. And then yet, again, you see what happens that Jahan Dotson is a Philadelphia Eagles. So I'm excited about it. I know a lot of people are, but share for the people as well, because again, this is the first time I guess we're recording on this. But Jahan Dotson's impact, just also your thoughts upon hearing the news, obviously, but even thinking about it more so within Kellen Moore's offense. I mean, the trio is fantastic. Jahan Dotson saying it's whose Madden Ultimate Team is this, so he's hyped. But what impact does he make as wide receiver 3?
I feel like it was an obvious need, and I feel like I put out a list for PFN of like 15 different potential targets at wide receiver 3, and
kudos to
a
you.
lot of people were like,
15 different.
why did Jahan Dotson why was he not on that list? And I was like, listen, I think and I got roasted for it afterwards. People were like, oh, is this the Saquon prediction all over again? I was like, no, this is the complete opposite, because I never said the Eagles wouldn't have interest. I just said I didn't think the Commanders would give up on a receiver in his third year that has shown promise. I know it's a new coaching regime and front office or whatever, but it just seemed like they were going to give him another chance because they don't really have too much talent at wide receiver. I know they have Terry McLaurin and they drafted Luke McCaffrey, but outside of that, I mean, De'Ami Brown, I mean, nothing that really kind of stands out to you. So it just seemed like it made sense to kind of give him another chance, but obviously they went in a different direction. And I think it's a steal for Philadelphia because he kind of fits in perfectly because he can line up both outside and inside. I know he's a smaller receiver, but he does have that versatility to line up basically anywhere, which is what Kellen Moore wants to do. He wants to utilize guys in different positions, different roles. And people have talked about, oh, well, maybe he's not the best blocker or he's not going to take the top of a defense. But I just feel like with his like route running ability and his ability to kind of find holes in zone coverage, I just think he's a perfect complement to those two, while also being a legitimate backup in case one of those two does go down. Because if AJ Brown or Devontae Smith got hurt, now you're relying on Britton Covey to play 100% of the snaps or something like that, or Johnny Wilson being thrusted into action when people questioned if he was even going to play receiver in the NFL. So I just feel like now it's a much better situation. You can argue the cost because honestly, looking back at it, I think I'd rather have just waited, kept the pick, and signed Noah Brown to be that third receiver instead of trading a third-round pick for Jahan Dotson. But hindsight is 20/20, and you can't always just go back and redo things. But the fact that he's on a cheap contract for at least 2 more years and the option for a 5th year, I just feel like it was worth the risk of Philadelphia. And now they have their kind of core trio at receiver for at least the next 2 seasons.
Yeah, I'm like I say, I'm very excited about the move. The fact that you get a guy like that, his ability, and whether it is, again, it's like you say, that the depth there in case there's an injury, but also whenever he's on the field, he's wide receiver 3. But I mean, it's like, okay, 4th option maybe in the offense, 5th option in the offense. So you're not asking him to do too much, but also I feel like it's not the pressure on him where maybe he felt like he had to do more or he was pressing. There were reports of not necessarily the greatest camp that he was having in Washington. Yet at the same time, I mean, for the most part, the vast majority of individuals looking at this is like, okay, yeah, hey, 3rd round, that is something for sure. But the compensation and to get a guy like that who still has 2 years on the deal and the cap hit of $4 million in the first year, and I believe it's $5 million off the top of my head for the second year, $6 million. So it's not that much, especially considering you're building this offense, you're structuring it around what Kellen Moore is hoping to do, designing for Jalen Hurts, is like, okay, you know what, you make that move. You put your chips on the table. Howie Roseman felt good about it. He had him, marked as a good potential, even back whenever Dotson was first coming out for the draft. So it's like, all right, hey, you have those guys that you thought highly of before. Now you have an opportunity later on to potentially trade for him. You make it happen, and the rest is history. So he's actually here. I did think it was kind of humorous, the fact that the Commanders released a mic'd up clip of Jahan Dotson at training camp, like, 12 hours before the trade. So
it seems like that never fails. I feel like the last couple moves I've seen, there's been like some type of mic'd up or some kind of segment that a team releases on, like they'll wish him a happy birthday, and next thing you know, they're cutting him or trading him. It's just like the timing of these things sometimes is so hilarious.
It really is. It really is. Although I should say, hopefully it's not the case for Philly, because the last, I guess, official mic'd up one would have been, I think it was the Devontae Smith with the weight training. So, but nothing's happening with Smitty, thankfully, so we don't have to worry. But you are right. It is funny when you look at that and see some of the guys that you're like, all right, well, was there a disconnect there? Did someone not get the memo? Or more than likely it was didn't expect it to happen. All of a sudden it's like, oh, okay, you know what? There's compensation works out, and you're good for both sides. But as Alec Peters has once already called Howie Roseman a pain in the ass, so it might have been the same thing, and Howie ended up getting a good deal for him. So either way, I'm excited to see him, get the situation there. Sometimes a change of scenery as well, so maybe helping for both sides. But it will be interesting because of this offense. Everyone's hyped on it for sure, but you certainly look at this squad and it's like, there's so much to like. Defensively, it's there's still a lot of promise, but I think that's naturally one of the more question marks. But you look at it, and there's several guys when we talk about the youth on this team, especially with rookies, that probably are going to have a little bit more impact, or at least ask for more impact than we would have thought previously, from the way that things have shaken up and certainly playing time and reps and all that. But what do you make of, because you touched on it a little bit earlier, of like Howie Roseman and, kind of the youth movement, but where we've seen these rookies progress, how he talked about it in his press conference, and the impact they can have not only long-term but within this year. But what we saw from training camp, it's been a little bit, but just kind of recapping training camp situation, also moving forward with these roster cuts and how much the Eagles are going to ask for, specifically, I guess, the rookies on the defensive side of the ball.
I mean, you have to be encouraged, because it feels like even just throughout like the public practice or the preseason games, it seems like every single one of their rookies, aside from maybe Dylan McMahon, has kind of stood out in a positive way, because I mean, Quinyon Mitchell almost had that interception. Cooper DeJean made plays in his only game back. I mean, granted, some people complained about his coverage at times or his tackling or whatever, but it was literally his first game back since like last November. So then you got to cut the guy some slack. And then Jalyx Hunt, I personally think that he's a better player right now than Nolan Smith, and I caught some flack for that, but I just think and I know that might hurt you a little bit too, but I just think his versatility and his versatility and his athleticism was already put on display. I mean, now we'll see how long he's out with this oblique injury, but he avoided the IR, so I guess that's kind of promising. And then Jeremiah Trotter Jr., I mean, he was a fan favorite just because of obviously who his father was, but he's also made plays during the preseason. But it's not even just the defensive guys, because obviously Johnny Wilson, before he suffered his concussion, he was promising. It seemed like he was going to have a legitimate role, maybe even be wide receiver 3. But now they can kind of bring him along a little bit slower because of Dotson's arrival. And Trevor Keegan, some people were calling for him to start at right guard because of how well he played at left guard in the preseason. But it seems like that's kind of where they want to stick him. And just to bring up one more point with the offensive line, I know it's a little bit off subject, but one thing I do like about the way their offensive line is structured right now is you kind of have designated backups at each spot, but outside of center, because at left tackle, it seems like Fred Johnson's the guy. At left guard, it seems like Keegan's the guy. Right guard, Tyler Steen. And then right tackle, you have, what's his name escaping me right now?
The Fred Johnson and Kennard. Yeah.
Oh, Darian Kennard's the right tackle.
Yeah, right tackle, yeah.
Where he's been working basically all preseason and looking good. So it seems like outside of center, they kind of had those designated roles, whereas last year, it seemed like they kind of like, once somebody got hurt, they were like, I will throw this guy there. Like, they didn't really have a designated backup. So I think that's just a much better situation to be in as a whole. And then obviously to finish off the rookies, Will Shipley, I feel like he's going to have some type of role. I know it's going to be tough to maybe see the field behind Saquon Barkley and Kenneth Gainwell, but I think he showed enough during the preseason that they're going to have to use him in one way or another, either if it's kick returner or in the slot sometimes as a receiver. I just feel like he offers too much, and he's a tough runner. He avoided fumbling the ball during the preseason, which was kind of a problem in college. So if he can kind of clean that up, I feel like it's going to be tough to keep him off the field.
Yeah, I mean, it's certainly as far as fumbling the football, and we'll see where Tyrion Davis-Price ends up, but TDP, unfortunately, I think with the fumbles, hurt himself on that side. So, he showed some tough runs, but just, ball security is job security, as they say. And Will Shipley has shown that, which is good for the rook there, and good for a lot of the rooks, And I think it is a good point that you bring up also with the O-line, because you think about last season, it's like, oh, yeah, Jack Driscoll, throw him out there, or Suo Peta, throw him out there. And
I felt like Jack Driscoll was playing everywhere, like over the last couple of years.
Insert wherever you want, and that was not the best feeling. So it should be better, should have some more promise. We'll see, because it is exciting there. I've got to ask, because you brought it up, and maybe it's a little out of order of where I was necessarily thinking about going on this, but Nolan Smith, I'm hyped about Jalyx Hunt. I think that there's a lot of potential there. I am a very big fan of Nolan Smith, and you are too. So, we'll get that straight. But at the same time, people asking questions and, hey, getting my thoughts and everything. And I basically said it on the last video. I was like, look, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I'm not going to say that, it's a positive sign to see Nolan Smith out there on the final preseason game playing so many snaps when a lot of the other starters have been pulled or didn't even play. And he also did not make a whole lot of moves. He didn't really do much. And so, that's not the most positive sign. However, there's still there's a contingency that's saying the dude's a bust already. And then there's some that's just like, okay, yes, there's concern. And I get that part of it, because there's sure concern short term, but like long term, there's no reason to be calling this dude a bust already, right?
No, not at all. And I feel like a lot of people kind of jumped to that conclusion when I tweeted that I thought Jalyx Hunt was outperforming Nolan Smith, they were like, oh, does this mean Smith sucks and that he's the worst player ever and he's the defensive Danny Watkins? But no, he's just right now. I think he's not the kind of like the complete package that Jalyx Hunt is as far as like his versatility, because Vic Fangio likes to drop his edges in coverage quite a bit and then kind of send an inside linebacker instead. It's still a 4-man rush, but now he's dropping Nolan Smith or Jalyx Hunt into coverage, whereas I feel like Smith kind of doesn't look too comfortable there, and because he's already kind of working on his pass rush skill set to begin with, because in college he kind of just beat guys with his power and then his bend, but in the NFL you kind of have moves and then counter moves to your counter moves, and he's not really there just yet. So I just think he doesn't really have like the length and the size to just be able to rely on his power and his bend, but he needs to just kind of build up that pass rush repertoire, and I feel like he'll eventually have a role. I don't think he's a bust by any means, but I just think right now, especially in Vic Fangio's scheme, I wouldn't be surprised if Hunt kind of had more snaps than him in 2024.
I got to say, I agree with you. I don't feel like I would have said that previously, but from the sample size of preseason, from training camp, what we've heard, and to the point of Nolan, he doesn't really, it's one move. He's going to try to beat you around the edge. And if it doesn't happen, it seems to be he's just going to keep going around the edge, and it's going to get further and further. And, you could make the case, well, he's got contained, but that only works to some point, because eventually you have such a big hole that it's like, oh, there goes the quarterback, and they're gone. So, and everybody remembers that from last season, which we do not want. So if you're talking about that and the difference between the two, then yeah, I wouldn't be as surprised, which when Jalyx Hunt was first drafted, I was like, okay, cool, long-term prospect, Houston Christian, but as of now, I mean, we're just, I guess, a little bit more than a week away from the Packers game. It wouldn't surprise me if you were like, well, hey, Jalyx Hunt played the same amount of snaps, or hey, Jalyx Hunt played a little bit more snaps than Nolan Smith. So we'll see. But I am in the same agreement with you as far as like, Nolan's not a bust. Let's pump the brakes. I got some of those comments in the video. Say, hey, I know you love your guy, but he's a bust. It's like, hold on. We've seen instances, and he could be. Like, I'm also not going to say, like, okay, it's impossible that, he's for sure going to live up to expectation, but it's like you still see instances of guys who show up in the league, and it takes them 2, 3, 4 years even to really start asserting themselves and doing things. So, I don't know. That's where I'm at least as far as Nolan. But
look at Hassan Reddick, for example. I mean, he was playing out of position, kind of asked to drop in coverage more than he should have, just like Nolan Smith has kind of been so far. So, and maybe one day he'll be asked to just rush the passer, and that's when he'll become a double-digit sack player. But right now, he's kind of still adjusting. So everybody needs to just relax a little bit.
Thank you. Yes, and very similar size too. So again, for people that are that way. So and Nolan might actually play this year as opposed to Hassan Reddick, who I don't know. I mean, we've just racked up a ridiculous tab at this point that I don't know what's going to happen there, but that's,
he better hope that signing bonus, whenever he agrees to that contract, is able to make up for all these fines, because that situation is
an absolute nightmare. I know we've talked about it several times, and it's just interesting to see it from afar. But it's I don't know. Hassan Reddick, the Jets should have known what they were getting into. Joe Douglas in that decision, it's good for them. They can deal with that problem. That's theirs now. It's ridiculous, though. It's kind of comical watching it from that way. But as far as this roster's keeping with the Eagles, where's your biggest from the 53 man? I know we kind of touched on center, so that may be part of it. But where's the biggest concern for you based on what you see so far, right? And this is, again, recording here before we see other moves at the time of this recording. You haven't had the official full practice squad filled out for the Eagles, but biggest weakness or maybe area for the Eagles on the roster?
So I wrote an article for PFN. I'm not sure when it's going to come out, but it's the 3 areas of concern for the Eagles following final cuts. So number 1 was the backup center position, which we already talked about. Then I have the 3rd tight end spot, which we kind of touched on also. And then lastly, it's the experience level along the defensive line, because I just feel like I know Jalen Carter, Jordan Davis, Milton Williams, all these guys, they're super intriguing. They have a ton of upside, but it's just the truth is they really haven't played that much in the NFL as far as being full-time starters. So now you're kind of relying on them playing potentially 800-plus snaps like Christian Wilkins and Zach Sealer did for Vic Fangio in Miami last season. So it's going to be a huge jump for players that people were already questioning their conditioning. So I think that's something that we're only going to be able to prove with time. It's not like they're going to magically have that experience right away, but I think they'll be fine overall. I don't think it's a huge concern, but I think it's a worry, because these guys never have really had to handle that workload because even in college they were kind of rotated a lot. So it'll be interesting to see how they handle it, but I think they're perfectly capable of doing so. It's just a matter of them actually proving it in Vic Fangio's scheme.
It's definitely one of the biggest, I'd say, storylines going into Green Bay for me, because I'm right there with you as far as like, okay, Fangio's talked about it, and he's like, as the adults in the room, we got to push him, and Clint Hurt having his inside on the D-line especially, and it's like, okay, the pieces are there, but again, it comes down to like, are we actually going to see that? Like, I'm hopeful, and if JD lives up to his expectations or his potential, then all of a sudden you're like, oh yeah, hey, the run stopping is great. He's going to command a double team there. He's going to at least take up 2 gaps. You got Jalen Carter to be able to make some noise. If he's commanding a double team, then someone else is free. Maybe Milton Williams shines. He's trying to get a contract. So there's reasons that we could be hopeful, but again, it comes down to, okay, can they actually do that? And I don't know. There's some concern on that side because we haven't seen it on those. But I think really within the middle of the field is at least for me. There's still concerns within linebacker. I'm cautiously optimistic. I will say that it could be a linebacker by committee. It could be just 2 guys. We'll see who Fangio ends up going with, and then we have safety. Who again, it's C.J. Gardner-Johnson, Reed Blankenship. But then you look at depth-wise, do you feel great about Avonte Maddox? Do you feel great about James Bradberry, who we can talk about the surprise and shock that he made the roster, depending on, people where they think on that. But, like I say, you've got those guys. You've got Tristin McCollum, who very well deserved to make the roster, I think, and based on how he played. But 5 safeties, and that's not including Sidney Brown being on the PUP list. So what's up with safety? I'm curious to get your thoughts there. Oh, and by the way, I guess I should insert this too, but Caden Stearns, I assumed there would be some sort of role for him here, but maybe a non-football injury-related, waiver situation that, roundabout way potentially could work his way back to Philly. But I don't know, just a kind of a strange situation altogether with safety. What are your thoughts within those guys?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just happy that Tristin McCollum made the final cut because I felt like he was clearly their best safety throughout all of preseason. And I was just like, it seemed like last season that they waived him, even though he kind of showed some promise during the preseason. Then he finally got elevated to the active roster for the last game of the year. But it was just, I feel like they needed some type of player that has experience playing safety. Granted, he doesn't have a ton of experience playing safety in the NFL, but kind of some upsides to develop moving forward because obviously Avonte Maddox, James Bradberry aren't long-term answers as far as safety depth goes. So. And then Sidney Brown's obviously still recovering. So I think if CJ Gardner-Johnson and Reed Blankenship can stay healthy, they're going to be in great shape. But both players missed multiple games last season, and it's going to be tough to watch because if either one of them goes down, now you're asking guys that really have only played cornerback their entire careers to now step up at safety unless they kind of give McCollum that opportunity. So I think as a whole, the safety group is still kind of questionable because you have those health concerns that you can't just ignore. But I think if they all stay healthy, it's going to look great. If somebody starts getting hurt and missing a couple games here and there, then things can get kind of ugly real quick.
Never thought I would say that, if the Eagles end up having an injury, that we're relying on James Bradberry to be a backup safety situation. Yet here we are. I mean, that's literally where this thing could be. We hope not. We hope that everyone stays healthy and we're not dealing with any sorts of backups. But again, this is the NFL, and seeing the injury history of some of the players, it's like, well, it comes with the territory, and that's usually guys that are injured fairly frequently continue to be guys that are injured fairly frequently, and so I don't know. I'm hopeful. I mean, somebody even said recently, oh, how great would it be if James Bradberry redeems himself? He stays on the roster. He has to play later. You make it to a Super Bowl. He makes a play that'd be fantastic. I mean, everybody's all for that. It's nothing personal against the guy, but I still ask myself, okay, has he shown enough, especially when it comes to making a tackle in the safety spot? And that's the question that, we may not even know that answer until he's forced into action if he has to play as that backup safety. So lots of concerns, I would say. If you have any sort of injury, lots of concerns for that safety spot.
But I mean, I'm kind of happy for James Bradberry in a way too. I know a lot of fans were upset to kind of see him make the final roster, but I mentioned it a week or two ago that I thought he was going to make the roster once he kind of looked solid in that second preseason game, and people thought I was crazy for saying so. But you just have to think of it from a financial standpoint. They're already paying a ton of dead cap money to Avonte Maddox because they released him and then brought him back, and then they would be doing the same thing with James Bradberry, but he would be playing elsewhere. So if you already are going to be paying this guy a ton of money regardless, you might as well just keep him around. The only concern was that they were going to have to cut Tristin McCollum to keep him around. But with the new IR rules, they were kind of able to work their way around that. They didn't have to hold players on the roster and then place them on IR afterwards. So that was kind of good to see, and it kind of worked in the Eagles' favor this year. But, I mean, will Bradberry be on the roster in week 1? Who knows? Maybe they find a trade or they end up cutting him for somebody that they claim or something like that. But I think overall the Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni kind of said positive things about him and the way he's viewed as a leader in the secondary. So, I mean, it's not the end of the world to have a guy there. I know he disappointed last season, but it seems like he's embracing the change, and who knows, it might work out.
I'm hopeful. Again, I'm not wishing anything ill will towards him. It's just it's some concerns, and again, maybe he doesn't have to play, and maybe if he does play, he plays fairly well, and it's solid enough, and you're okay. But like you said, I mean, Howie is still always perusing the market, trying to look for deals, seeing if he can get the team better. I mean, he said that. He's like, heck, we're going to take a look at potential players or players that are available and things like that. But I got to ask you, because recent trade and acquisition for Tennessee, which, was stirred up because as soon as usually any player is out there, it's hey, Howie Roseman may be looking into this call. He may or may not be. So you could basically say that about anybody. But Ernest Jones, a linebacker for LA, was granted the ability to seek a trade, I guess. And so the Tennessee Titans put together a package, and not a lot, quite honestly. Like, you see what it was worth, what it came down to. It's a 5th round selection from Tennessee for Ernest Jones and LA's 6th round. And so it's hardly anything. That's just a barely 1 round difference, and you're getting the guy. Now, I understand, okay, yes, that the contract that's probably going to come with that, hopefully maybe they learned from the Jets of like, all right, let's make sure we're going to pay this guy because that's why he wanted to get traded in the first place, is get a contract. But still, just compensation-wise, when you look at it, it's like, man, if Howie wanted to do something there, that would have been something that feels fairly easy to go in and make a play. Do you feel like it's something compensation-wise that Howie maybe wasn't willing to give up, or do you feel like he's set with he likes his linebackers enough where it was like, I'm not interested, or it could be something else, I guess. But between those options or something else, why or I guess where do you think that Howie may have been on this one?
Well, it seemed like Ernest Jones, the reason he kind of wanted out of LA, or they allowed him a chance to seek a trade, was that he wanted a huge contract. So that hasn't been announced yet. Maybe it'll be announced soon, or he agreed to kind of revisit talks in the offseason with the Titans. But it just seems like maybe the Eagles weren't willing to meet his demands in that regard, because if it comes to just like the straight up trade compensation, it seems like a no-brainer for basically any team in the NFL to do that deal, because Jones is one of the best young linebackers in the NFL right now. So It's kind of crazy that the Rams just kind of moved on from him, considering they already have to deal with the loss of Aaron Donald and moving forward with kind of a younger core. It seemed like he can kind of be the guy in the middle for that group and kind of be the foundational player moving forward. But for some reason, they decided to move on from him. But the Titans just continue to kind of have a somewhat surprisingly good offseason, and I feel like I tweeted that they were my dark horse in the AFC, not to win the conference or anything like that, but I feel like it wouldn't surprise me if they were kind of like the Texans of last year in 2024, because I think their roster is really talented, and I feel like they could make a push for a playoff spot, either winning the AFC South or just making a wild card spot.
Okay. All right. You heard it here first. Anthony DiBona, NFL Analyst, Pro Football Network, has got do you have like an official number prediction for their wins losses as your AFC dark horse, or are we set on anything there for the Titans?
Well, I don't know. I feel like the AFC South was kind of like, I don't know, underrated last season, because they did have 3 teams with 9 or more wins, and I feel like kind of just got swept under the rug because the AFC North is so stacked and the Chiefs are there and the Texans, blah, blah, blah. But like, I just feel like the Titans can kind of, they made a change at head coach with Brian Callahan coming in. He brought his dad in to kind of coach the offensive line. They added J.C. Latham after getting Peter Skoronski last year. I feel like their offensive line is heading in the right direction. They added Tony Pollard, Calvin Ridley, Tyler Boyd, Will Levis showed promise as a rookie. So I feel like they already have a ton of pieces, and now I feel like they have the right head coach, kind of offensive play caller in place to kind of maximize that. And then on defense, Jeffrey Simmons is already considered one of the best defensive linemen in the league, and you added Tavondre Sweat and Chidobe Awuzie and Quandre Diggs and Kenneth Murray, and old Eagles friend Denard Wilson is getting his first chance as a defense coordinator. They traded for L'Jarius Sneed, so I don't want this to become a Titans show, but I just feel like they've done a lot. They've done a lot this offseason to kind of flip things around, and I feel like the AFC South is kind of wide open. But I also personally think the Texans might kind of underwhelm a little bit this season after kind of surprising everybody last year. I think they'll have a little bit more pressure with a target on their back, and I'm a bit lower on them than most. So I wouldn't be surprised. I'll give it maybe I'll say a 60% chance that the Titans make the playoffs. So I think I'm a lot higher on them than most people.
All right, I like it. Yeah, I mean, I can see that. Definitely, you don't have as much of the target on your back, and people either knowing what you can do or maybe underestimating and things like that. So I like that. Speaking of kind of telegraphing or teams picking up on certain things, there was a recent report that one defensive coach, and I don't know exactly if it was named specifically, I don't think I ever saw it, but one defensive coach had basically said that Jalen Hurts can't handle the blitz. It's been picked up on. If you blitz him zero, that he's just not going to be able to handle it. He's going to get antsy. And I believe it was also even referencing from potentially the joint practice situation with New England, which is, okay, well, it's just a joint practice. It's one practice. Understand that. But we saw from last year what took place with the blitzing, and it only seems to reason that, sure, Jalen's going to have to prove it that he can beat the blitz. Do you think that plays into the favor, though, if, you got one quote from this defensive coach, but we've heard it from others, and especially if you look back at Jalen's, career, that he's going to be tested, but even more so coming away from this past season, does it play into a favor of, hey, you know what, they could probably expect that he's going to get blitzed. Kellen Moore obviously has blitz beaters in his past based on his history and his resume of other quarterbacks, but you see that as potentially, hey, all right, we're going to get blitzed, we're going to take advantage of it, and I don't know, maybe certainly you want to hope or say like turn around some numbers, but I'm talking about like drastic changes and like, I don't know, maybe shut up some defensive coordinators or at least prove a point of like, all right, you want to blitz me? This is going to be great.
I think it's just a little bit of like unfair scrutiny for Jalen Hurts, because if you look at like 2021, 2022, when Shane Steichen was the offensive coordinator, he looked way better against the blitz. I think he had like 26 passing touchdowns to just 12 interceptions. And then, because I've wrote about it for PFN multiple times, whereas I think Kellen Moore's going to have a great plan in place, like you said, to beat the blitz. But last season, everybody wants to talk about because he had just 6 passing touchdowns and 8 interceptions against the blitz. So he really took a step back last season, but I don't think the offense did him any favors, and Brian Johnson calling the plays or Nick Sirianni, whoever it was calling the plays, because it just seemed like there was never really a hot read for him against the blitz. They kind of just had a bunch of vertical deep passing routes, and they were like, oh, just chuck the ball down there or try and run out of the pocket and extend the play so you can throw it down the field. But if you look at Kellen Moore's numbers as an offensive coordinator and what Dak Prescott did and Justin Herbert did under his watch, both of them, I think, had passer ratings in the triple digits. They all had great touchdown to interception ratios against the blitz. So I think the play caller kind of factors in more than just Hurts being bad or not being able to kind of find answers against the blitz. So I think he should take a massive step forward with Kellen Moore as offensive coordinator. And I don't think it's just a Jalen Hurts problem. I think it's just an offensive scheme problem in Philadelphia.
Okay, there you go. I agree. I think that it's going to be something that, you see a difference. Jalen can handle it, certainly with a change of offensive coordinator, but give him the weapons. He's making some more checks or reads at the line, obviously talking with his protection, which was previously handled by Jason Kelce. But now it's like, all right, hey, Jalen's going to be doing that and be involved a lot more. So that's a good sign. But it'll be interesting, and as far as some changes there, I've got to bring this up because this is not necessarily like a big official change, but I think Jimmy Kempski had written about it or tweeted about it initially, and then you highlighted it as well. But Ben VanSumeren, kudos to him for making the roster. I personally believe that he's the best special teams player on the roster. I think a lot of people would probably agree with that, but he's made some plays. He's shown tons of athleticism. Not a surprise. I think most people know that and understand it coming out of the draft from day one, undrafted free agent. But in that situation, his raw athletic score, all the things there. But the Eagles, are they doing something strange with Ben VanSumeren? They lined him up at tight end, and it's just kind of a strange, I don't know, maybe unusual quote that we got from Ben VanSumeren. Like we could see that more. What's going on? What do you speculate with Ben VanSumeren on the other side of the ball?
That made me so excited to see, because for the people that don't know, Ben VanSumeren was actually recruited to play fullback at Michigan in 2018. And then made the switch to running back in 2019. So he didn't actually start playing linebacker until 2020, until I guess he failed or struggled at those other 2 spots. So it's just kind of encouraging because if you, like you said, if you look at his athleticism, it's off the charts. I know he's just 6'2", 230, whatever, so his size isn't necessarily that of a tight end. But if you look at him, say, like, side by side, because I looked at it right before we started recording, just his numbers next to his athletic testing across from, like, a guy like Kyle Pitts, and he kind of smokes him in almost every category. So it's kind of crazy just to think about, like, his athleticism and his upside. But who knows? I mean, he's already shown how physical he is and how fast he could be. So maybe the Eagles kind of use him in, like, that F hybrid role where he's kind of like a fullback, third tight end for the most. Maybe that's why they didn't keep a third tight end, because they have Ben VanSumeren on the roster, and they plan on using him in a fullback role, like I mentioned, like the old James Casey role that he played when he was in Philadelphia.
Yes,
the people that they thought he was going to play that role in Philadelphia before he kind of fell out of favor. But yeah, I think that might work. Who knows? I mean, you're going to have him active on game day anyway, even though he might not play linebacker. Like you said, he's going to be a core special teams player. So if you can kind of use his athleticism and kind of catch teams off guard, whether it's just him blocking for Saquon as a fullback and kind of flying through the hole and taking out opposing linebackers and some linebacker on linebacker violence. But it just seems like it's a fun idea. And if they want to give it a try, it seems like he's excited about it and embracing it. So I'm all for letting defensive players kind of get on the field and see what they could do on offense.
Heck yeah. Again, the fact that he's got the versatility, he's already played both sides of the ball, and he does have that athleticism. He kind of, not directly only him, but put Andre Sam out of a job. So, he routed him up on one route situation. I mean, if you get beat by a linebacker, I don't know if that's the most positive sign. Granted, as you say, Ben VanSumeren had played offense before, and he does have a ton of athleticism, so that's not necessarily a knock to Andre Sam. But Ben VanSumeren is showing that he has the potential there. And I think my favorite thing, again, just going back to it, is like the quote that he said, in paraphrasing it, but was basically like, I can't speak on it fully, but it basically could be seen again, right? So you just kind of leave it at that. And that tells me all that I need to know of saying, all right, this thing is not completely dead. You might see this further on the season, whether this is more involved of like a trick play or an actual scheme, like you say, is, hey, maybe do you want a fullback? Do you want to have a fullback in some situations? You want to go block for Saquon? Absolutely. You love physicality. You already got it on that side. So I don't know. That's something to keep an eye on as we continue to move forward here, because anytime you got a guy of that versatility. So, I got to mention this too, and you touched on it a little bit, but just to kind of double down here, because Cooper DeJean, we hadn't seen too much as far as the preseason, obviously with the hamstring injury, and so everyone was waiting, like, okay, when are we going to get to see him? How will he play? How will he perform? A little bit of, made some good plays. There were some other times where it's like, not so great within preseason, but I think that's understandable with rust. But where do you see Cooper DeJean? Because I've gotten questions asked of, hey, is he going to be in the nickel? Is he going to be in the safety? Do you see him eventually winning out as a starting job this season? Or is he going to be just that fill-in, plug-and-play player if someone gets hurt or injured? Do you have a sense on that for now? I know things could obviously change, but just from the very early takeaways, what you saw in the preseason game, and potentially how he gets used by Fangio.
Well, since the draft passed, I feel like a lot of people said that his best fit was going to be in the nickel, at least immediately in Philadelphia, until they move on from Darius Slay in the future or whatever the case might be. And then you would have Quinyon Mitchell on one side and Cooper DeJean on the other. But I just feel like his debut was pretty solid overall, especially given the fact that he hasn't played a real game since November of last year. So, I mean, I tweeted that he got saved by the sideline a few times in coverage, and people thought that meant I was saying he was the worst player ever. But I was simply just pointing out that there was one rep in particular where he got beat to the corner of the end zone, and the pass was kind of late and the receiver wasn't able to get his second foot down. But people were like, oh, no, that's all technique. He's using the sideline to his advantage. But, like, you can't really do that in the slot. And I feel like on one of the plays he definitely kind of was able just to push the guy right out of bounds and save the touchdown there. But on that play in particular, I feel like when you're playing against starting caliber players and not third team offense, that's probably going to be a touchdown. So am I super concerned about him? Not at all. But I just feel like that was just one of the points that I kind of noted as far as like, I guess a weakness or like a downturn during his debut. But he also, like you said, he showed a ton of promise, especially in run support, which is what Vic Fangio kind of wants in his slot cornerback. So that was good to see because he's going to blitz him a lot against the run, and he's going to want him to kind of play almost like a linebacker role. So to see him kind of not be afraid to be physical in his return was huge. And then there was just one other play that kind of was a little discouraging, and I think it was called for a penalty, but he lined up kind of 10, 15 yards off the line in the slot, and he kind of just like battering ran himself into the receiver and didn't even like didn't even try to make an attempt. And I don't know if he was just caught off guard or what the case was there, but that was kind of a weird play. But overall, I think he's going to be just fine. And I feel like ideally, he seems like a perfect fit in the slot in Vic Fangio's scheme. So I think that's what they would want to have. I know it might bump Isaiah Rodgers to a backup role, but I think Quinyon Mitchell on one side, Darius Slay on the other, with Cooper DeJean in the slot is probably your ideal secondary moving forward.
Okay. Well, we'll keep an eye on it, obviously, because there's, getting close to the game in Brazil, and there's plenty of time because even some of that rust that we saw from Cooper DeJean. But like you say, the fact that he's not afraid to play with that physicality, and as Fangio had mentioned, whenever he's getting asked, differences of nickel versus playing outside, and he's like, nickel's basically completely different. It's more like a linebacker, as you alluded to as well. So I'm excited. I mean, heck, we've got real football regular season kicking off in just about a week, which is going to be insane against the Packers. I'll leave it with this, just last question here before we wrap it. But what are you most looking forward to? Putting you on the spot, kind of, so it may be hard. But what are you most looking forward to for the Packers game in the opener in Brazil?
I just want to see how the defense responds after being torched by so many teams down the stretch of last season. I feel like Howie Roseman kind of put all his eggs in the secondary basket this offseason and kind of revamped that spot. And obviously the linebacker position might have two new starters as well if Devin White and Zach Bond are starting there. So it's going to be interesting to see how the Eagles defense holds up against one of the rising offenses in the NFL that kind of caught fire to end last season. And we'll see how the Eagles can handle them in Brazil. But it's going to be a tough task. We kind of talked about it before we started recording, but the Eagles are starting with a legitimate opponent in week one for the first time in several years. So it's going to be interesting to see how they respond to tough competition right to open the season, especially at a neutral site. It's not going to be a home game, so we'll see how they handle it. But that's definitely what I'm looking forward to the most. I'm not too concerned about the offense. I think they're going to be great once again, but it's going to be fun to see how the defense handles such a tough talent challenge.
There you go. Get that momentum rolling. Start out with a bang. Good opponent, as we said too. I mean, a win against Green Bay would certainly be a statement. Obviously, it's just one game, but everybody get out on the right foot and say, all right, let's get this thing. I guess also not only get the ball rolling necessarily within this season, but really to put everything behind us from last year. I feel like it'd be kind of killing two birds with one stone, so to speak. But obviously not our birds. So as far as what I'm looking forward to, I would say I agree with you on the defense. I'm really, and I know that you're not saying you're not looking for it, but I'm really looking forward to Jalen within this offense and Kellen Moore's offense because of the differences that I'm hoping to see, especially because like we hear or got glimpses of that within training camp or the Eagles open practice, but it's still, it's vanilla offense, especially within the preseason, but even within training camp, it's vanilla offense. You're not going to get everything. So I am very excited to see, okay, Kellen Moore, all bets are off. Go ahead. Throw the kitchen sink at him now. Regular season's here. And I'm hyped to see Jalen Hurts begin this thing and prove some doubters wrong because, there's lots of people that are jumping on that. We won't name names, but, one analyst predicting the Eagles to finish third in the NFC East. So, there's trolls out there. There's people that are just saying stuff to get views, which is perfectly fine. But still, prove them wrong. Go ahead and do that. Which, speaking of, good segue here, we got a Jalen Hurts giveaway. We got the jersey, the Kelee green signed Jalen Hurts that Anthony and I are doing. So if you've not gotten in on that, time is running out, but you have a little bit more time. It's
still my pinned tweet on my Twitter profile, so you could find it there. Get your entry in before the time expires, and hopefully somebody wins it. So we'll see.
Perfect. I was going to say, I got a link in the description too if you want to go check that out. But yes, Anthony's pinned tweet. Make sure all you got to do is just tag, follow the rules there, retweet, tag someone, follow, and you'll be in for the giveaway. I don't even know at this point. I think it's like 1,000 entries. It's something crazy. So you do have a chance, but there's a lot of people in for this one. And then we'll be drawing that one this, I guess, Friday the 30th. So like I say, you're running out of time, but there's a little bit of time left. So good luck to everybody getting in on that.
I'm excited. We could say that your chance to win is better than 0.0%. So that's a good thing.
It is better than your chance to win is more likely than the Eagles not signing Saquon Barkley. So there you go. I like it.
All right.
That's still your claim to fame.
I did it to myself.
The fact that you brought it up, so I just piled on, but
I have to.
Yes. Well, I appreciate it as always, man. And seriously, whether you're getting in on the giveaway or not, you should be following Anthony because one of the best follows on Twitter, on X, whatever you want to call it. I've got a link to his articles. So all the stuff with the Eagles and link there in the description. Make sure to support and appreciate you coming on as always.
It's a blast as always. And I'm excited to – real football is right around the corner. I could smell it in the air.
There you go.
I'm excited.
Fall is basically here, you know? I mean, weather depending on where people are, but fall is basically here and we got meaningful football. So appreciate you guys. Let us know thoughts in the comments. Anything you agree with, disagree with. We try to read as many as possible. And it's perfectly fine. If you want to agree to disagree, that is perfectly fine. Just, respectfully. But appreciate you guys. Until next time, we'll see you. Go Birds.